hello everyone. It's great to have you all join us again, and I hope you're all well. And as is always the case, the year's already racing away. But I hope you all got to enjoy the holidays, and also I hope that 2025 is filled with some great travel opportunities for you all, and yeah, some wonderful birds and wildlife as well in the mix too. So right on to today's Dream Destination webinar. As mentioned, it's going to be focusing on the northwest of Argentina. Yeah, a beautiful place, and we're going to get to see a whole lot about it shortly, as Stephan's going to be presenting. And yes, joining us today, Stephan Lorenz. So Stephan, a familiar face to many of you, either from tours that he's led that you've joined him on, or if you sort of jog the memory back all the way to our very first webinar in early 2020, which can you believe is now pretty much 5 years ago. Stephan was the presenter that day when he showcased the beautiful island of Sri Lanka. But yeah, for those of you who are not familiar with Stephan, I'll go ahead with a bit of background. He was born in Germany, but moved to the United States at a young age and began birding in Texas, which is one of the most biologically rich areas of the US. He then completed a Master of Science degree focusing on grassland birds before joining various research projects across the globe, and spent a huge amount of time in Alaska particularly. But Stephan also has a broad background in education as well, including teaching college-level biology and working as a biology educator for the National Audubon Society. But yeah, Stephan joined Rockjumper back in 2017, and he now leads tours for us to all corners of the globe. And then just a quick one on some housekeeping. Again, questions always very highly encouraged, so just feel free to send those questions through via the chat function at any stage, and we'll have a short Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to this part of Argentina. I've saying to Stephan earlier when we were catching up, I've done quite a bit of travel through Argentina, but the Northwest is still a big hole. So very excited to see what Stephan's got in store for us today. And yeah, on that note, it's over to you, Stephan.
Alrighty, thank you, Keith. Appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate folks taking their time to tune in to learn about birding in Northwest Argentina. And I guess I'd have to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Hopefully lots of people scattered around the world watching. And Argentina is a quite exciting country to go birding, and it's a bit overlooked compared to other destinations in South America. I mean, you have Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, Brazil, all quite famous. And Argentina is sometimes a little bit forgotten, but it's a fantastic country for birding. It's got a lot of wilderness areas, and it has more than 1,000 species also. And quite a few interesting endemics and lots of southern cone specialties. So today I'll walk us through the route in Northwest Argentina, and I'll highlight some of the different habitats we visit, highlight the endemics and some of the specialty species, and so on. So to give you just a few of the tour statistics, so this is basically the route that one can take through that part of Argentina. It takes about 14 days to cover it well, to cover most of the interesting birding spots. And the tour starts in Tucumán and ends in Salta. And Salta lies about 3 hours north of Tucumán. So the route makes a bit of a loop and then jogs out east into the Chaco and jogs north to the border with Bolivia. Overall, we visit 4 provinces, Tucumán, Salta, and Jujuy, and just a little bit of the Chaco. One can see about 9 endemics along this route. That's about half of the country's endemics. As you can see, Argentina doesn't have a huge number of endemics compared to some other South American countries, but it does have a lot of specialties and a lot of near endemics. So there's a good number of species that basically just slip over the border into Bolivia, so they're not considered endemics, but they're essentially more easy to see in Northwest Argentina. And the rufous-throated dipper that you can see in the corner here is a good example of that. So overall along the route, it's possible to see 310 to 330 species. Remember, most of the birding here will be in temperate habitats and up in the Andes, so it's not quite as species rich as some lowland rainforest, but lots of fantastic birds to be seen. So let's talk a little bit about what type of species. So Argentina is a great place to actually see tinamous and not just hear them. You can actually see up to Along this route, see 5 to 6 species and 8 species are possible. Good number of waterfowl with up to 20 species of ducks and geese. There are lots of wading and shorebirds along the route. It's quite interesting. Most of the habitats we visit are quite dry, but there are enough wetlands to add a lot of wetland birds to the list. It's a great tour for raptors and owls. Hummingbirds, about 14 species are possible. I know that in northern South America, there are certain feeder setups that have more than 14. So a limited number of hummingbirds, but many of them are near endemic and quite unique and special. In terms of species richness, this is really a great tour for the furnariids, the ovenbirds, up to 35 species of canasteros, horneros, tree creepers, wood creepers are possible. And then you have quite a number of flycatchers. This is the neotropics, so the neotropical tyrant flycatchers are really diverse, and a good number of tanagers are possible. Most of these are not your classic colorful Tangara tanagers, but include things like Sierra finches, warbling finches, and so on. For family listers, it's also quite interesting. You can see 5 of the bird families that are endemic to South America, including the rayas, screamers, seed snipes, seriemas, and the wonderful crescent chests. Just a quick overview of Argentina. It's a big country. It's the 2nd largest country in South America and the 8th largest country on the planet. From north to south, it's 2,360 miles, and across it's up to 880 miles. It's a really big nation. If you look at the cursor here, we're basically covering only a very small corner of the country in the northwest. To give you an idea, from Buenos Aires, which lies on the Atlantic coast, to Tucumán, the starting point of the tour, would be a drive of about 800 miles. And the small bird down here in the corner, that's the ubiquitous and common rufous hornero, which happens to be the national bird of Argentina. So if you look at a map of the biological provinces or the major habitats in the country, you can see that a lot of areas are covered by the similar habitat. So the yellow area here, for example, in the east, that's the famous Pampas grasslands. If you look in the south, there's kind of a purple-gray color. That would be the Patagonian steppe. But if you focus your attention up here in the northwest corner, you can see that you get 4 major habitats all coming together in a relatively small area. So that's what makes Northwest Argentina so exciting and so diverse, that you can cover these habitats in with relatively small travel times. The tour itself, actually, maybe the longest drive would be 3 to 4 hours. So if you look here, the light green area in the east, that's the Chaco, also known as the Gran Chaco. That's the largest dry forest in South America. The darker green area, that's the Yungas forest, which is kind of a pre-montane forest, and somewhat similar to cloud forest, not quite as humid. And that occurs from Peru all the way into northwest Argentina through Bolivia, and quite unique, and has quite a good number of specialties and endemics. And Argentina has some fine examples of Yunga forest. The red area here, that's the Monte Desert. That's a very important habitat. It's almost entirely endemic or only found in Argentina. You can see there's a sliver of Monte, what's known as the High Monte, extending north where we cross the Andes among some of these inter-Andean valleys. And then the orange color right here, right up on the border with Chile, those are the high Andes. Those represent Puna grasslands. Quick overview of the route. So we start in San Miguel, Tucumán. We travel up into the Andes to Tafi del Valle, north through the Valles Calchaquís, up to Cafayate, and then we go across the Andes again and back up into the Andes to Cuesta del Obispo, and then we actually swing all the way out east to bird a nice example of Chaco near the small town of Tacopozo. Then we head up to Calilegua National Park, which is a fine example of Yungas forest, and then all the way north, right up to the border with Bolivia at La Quiaca. So let me walk you through the different habitats and different specialties we can see. So the tour starts off really excitingly, fantastic start in the Rio Sosa Valley outside of Tucumán in the Yungas forest. So the Yungas forest, you can see, is really lush. It's restricted to the pre-cordilleras of the Andes and the east slope of the Andes, where there's basically enough moisture building up and creates enough humidity and rain to support this lush forest. It's full of mosses, epiphytes, and lots of specialty birds. And these clear running mountain streams that you can see here, it's a good example, are home to one of the main specialty bird species of the tour. Another good photo here showing how the Yungas works. So down here you can see some sort of pre-Yungas forest, a little bit of shrubby, and then the slopes are covered in lush green Yungas forest. And then as you get to higher elevation, further west, eventually the habitat turns to puna grassland. So as soon as you get out anywhere in the Yungas forest, especially during the austral spring and summer, it's just full of bird life, full of bird songs. You'll probably see some migrant parakeets right away, relatively widespread species, probably more than one species involved. One of the most common voices of the forest here is the brown-capped redstart, wonderful little warbler, and the southernmost member of the white-start group. Also lots of flycatchers. Mottle-cheeked tyrannulet is quite common here. This species has a disjunct distribution found in the Yungas and then also in the Atlantic forest of South America. And there are quite a few species that actually share that disjunct distribution, because essentially the Yungas is almost like an isolated patch of tropical wet forest. Slaty that's a migratory species, vocally quite common here, easy to identify for in Alania. And amazingly, it's highly migratory, moves all the way to Venezuela during the austral winter. Very little known is known about it on its migratory route, but on both ends and its breeding and wintering grounds, it's quite a common bird. Andean slaty thrush is a common voice in the forest here. This is a female bird right here. And not always easy to see, but with enough patience, one will sit up. And we'll start seeing the first endemic. So this is the yellow-striped brushfinch, which is endemic to a relatively small area of Yungas forest in northwest Argentina. It's a little surprising that it's so limited in its distribution. It doesn't go north across the border with Bolivia, even though Yungas forest extends into Bolivia. But within its range, within the right habitat, it's quite common. It's a bold bird, it's a noisy bird, and relatively easy to see. We'll also look for the large-tailed dove, also known as Yungas dove sometimes. That's a typical leptotilla dove, so a little bit shy, but distinctive if you see it well. And then one of the star attractions here, right outside of Tucumán below Tafi del Valle, is the rufous-throated dipper. This is the most range-restricted dipper of the 5 species around the world, and also the trickiest one to see. It's quite small compared to the other dippers and has this wonderful, distinctive rufous throat. It really depends on clean running streams with good or healthy Yungas forest around it. So it's quite range-restricted and threatened by habitat disturbance. And but with enough patience along the Rio Sosa, one can usually find a pair or individuals. This is probably the best place in the world to see it. Interestingly, compared to its American counterpart to the north, the American dipper, this one doesn't dive for food. It will swim and feed along the edge of the rivers, but it actually does not dive underwater. From the Rio Sosa Valley, the road winds up into the Andes, and you'll start getting views like that, just one ridge line after the other covered in puna grasslands. So here's a close-up of the habitat up here. So we'll end up in a wonderful little town called Tafi del Valle, which sits at about 6,600 feet, and it's surrounded by mountains. It's a bit of a local tourist town. People come up here to enjoy the climate, cooler climates, and enjoy hiking in the area. So from here we can drive up higher, and we can make various stops along these ravines, which are often productive. They harbor a bit of Andean scrub and boulders, and then the grasslands in between. This open habitat is good for raptors, lots of burrowing owls, and then things like this, variable hawks. Well-named bird, it's quite variable with light and dark morphs. Males and females are quite different, and there are even 2 distinctive subspecies, red-becked and puna hawk. And we'll start getting into some of these furnariids, some of these ovenbirds that I promised. And ovenbirds are a fascinating South American, mainly neotropical family, extends into Central America, of course. But there are 318 species in 71 genera. And they basically fill various ecological niches that in, let's say, Africa or Eurasia, oftentimes filled by different bird families. And this is all one family that's basically taken on the role of larks and wood creepers. They're canyon-like, they're wren-like ovenbirds, they're thrasher-like ovenbirds, and so on. And up here in the Andes, it's really rich for ovenbirds, and the rufous-banded miner is one of the more common ones. And this is a lark-like ovenbird, I would say. There are also straight-billed earth creepers. These occur at slightly lower elevation and sort of arid, scrub-covered slopes. To me, it's a bit reminiscent of an oversized canyon wren. Buff-breasted earth creepers occur in widespread species, occurs in two subspecies. And I would easily argue this is very similar to a thrasher, runs on the ground, about the same size as a thrasher, actually, with this wonderfully curved bill. The plain-mantled tit spinetail, another example of this family, another fernariid. And here it's represented by the Berlepschi subspecies, which might be a different species to the rest of the population in other countries. It's vocally different and also a bit darker. And they do behave very similar to chickadees, clambering through these Andean scrubs, hanging upside down. Here's a brown-capped tit spinetail, oftentimes occurring in the same habitat as the previous species. And as you can sort of see a trend here of rufous brown and grays, most ovenbirds, most fernariids are not particularly colorful, but they're subtly beautiful. And this brown-capped tit spinetail might be particularly plain. Along streams and small creeks, we can find wide-winged cyclodes, another example of the fernariids. And there's also cream-winged cyclodes up here, which is a bit more widespread in terms of habitat. The streak-fronted thornbird, it's a bit of an unusual thornbird for occurring at high elevations. Thornbirds are also ovenbirds, and they build these big stick nests. And the streak-fronted does the same, oftentimes overhanging a ravine or a cliff. And this one has a tendency to include garbage in its nests. I've seen multiple nests with pieces of plastic and paper built right in. And they spend most of their time on the ground feeding and can look a little bit like a canastero at first glance. And the wonderfully named scribble-tailed canastero is possible up here in Northwest Argentina. They're restricted to what's kind of the fog or cloud zone where more moisture gathers and provides these bunch grasses, these taller, more humid habitats. And they're quite range restricted and habitat specific, and oftentimes requires a bit of an effort away from the road to find a little bit of a hike or walk. But once you get into the right habitat, with luck, you can find the scribble-tailed canastero. It's not all brown and gray and rufous up here. You also get some colorful species like the gray-hooded Sierra finch. So this is now this is classified as a tanager. Few hummingbirds up here. The ones that are here are quite special. The giant hummingbird, largest hummingbird on the planet, and widespread, found all the way up to Ecuador, but can be seen relatively easy here. And more special is the red-tailed comet. This is a wonderful species of hummingbird. The tail, actually, you can't see the backside in this photo, but it's bright red and glossy, and a beautiful species. Occurs a little bit more at mid-elevation in drier areas. Black-winged ground dove, it's a widespread species, but it's relatively common up here. But more particularly, we'll be looking for the bare-eyed ground dove. That's an endemic, found in a relatively small area of northwest Argentina. Seems to prefer slightly drier habitats on either side of the mountains, not near the top so much. But with enough scrutiny of the small doves around, we can usually find some bare-eyed ground doves. Then a real special one is the Tucumán mountain finch. So that's also endemic to Argentina. It's got a sister species in Bolivia called the Cochabamba mountain finch. But they will travel in pairs usually through these Andean scrub. Not abundant, but with enough patience, usually findable, and a wonderful striking bird. There are also tapaculos here, not a super abundance of tapaculos, but there is the special white-browed tapaculo that's endemic, again, to a relatively small area of the Andes here in northwest Argentina. And unlike tapaculos that occur in cloud forest or subtropical forest, these tapaculos that occur in these more open habitats are readily seen. So the white-browed tapaculo oftentimes will sit out right on a rock and call or hop out in the open grasses. So relatively easy to see and photograph for tapaculo. There are some wetlands near Tafi del Valle. There's actually a large reservoir that's full of coots, waterfowl. There are even southern screamers, herons and egrets, snowy crowned terns. Really nice and easy area to bird. Lots of species for the trip list. This may look like a landscape photo, but in reality, it's a very distant photo of a vagrant horned coot that we found many, many years ago. And horned coots occur usually in the higher Andes further west, but there was a single bird that showed up here, and it's hard to see, but right in the middle, that is a horned coot. But it turned out to be a nice example of a landscape shot to give you an overview of this wetland. There are Andean geese usually around, wonderful goose of the high Andes, rosy-billed poachers, and so on. It's just a really nice afternoon spot to add a lot of wetland species to the list. To put you back on the map, just really quick, so down here you can see Tucumán, San Miguel de Tucumán, where we started, and we traveled up through the Rio Sosa Valley, this green area right here, that's the Yungas, all the way to Tafi del Valle. And from here we actually head north into these, well, first we go west across the Andes, and then north in the Calchaquís Valley, all the way up to Cafayate, one of the famous wine growing regions in Argentina. And we'll enter what's considered the Monte, or sometimes Monte Desert. This is the high Monte, so it's basically an intermontane valley. You got the Sierra Pampeanas to the east, and then you get the main spine of the Andes to the west, creating this rain shadow. And this is a wonderful habitat to bird in, somewhat reminiscent of the southwest of the United States, but this is where quite a few of the important endemics can be found. Another interesting site that we passed by are the ruins of Quilmes. This is the major archaeological site in Argentina. This was built by the Quilmes people. It's a fortified citadel, and they were actually able to hold off attempts by Inca invasions. And it was active around 850 AD, and at its height probably held 5,000 people. So we drive right past that wonderful ruin site with some good habitat around too. So as we come, so we'll come over the mountains, basically heading west, going down into the valley. There are lots of arroyos and little canyons along the way where we can stop and bird. We might find a lesser horned owl. That's the southern counterpart of the great horned owl. It's a bit smaller, as the name suggests, a bit browner with finer barring and vocally different. And it's also a little bit active during the day, like the great horned owl. A very important bird to find here is the Monte yellowfinch. This is an endemic. We're kind of at the northern edge of its range here. It's a bit more common further south in Argentina. But if we look carefully, we can usually find some. This was split from the greenish yellowfinch, which is quite similar and abundant in the area. So we need to take care to be able to pick one out. In the scrub, we might come across gray-hooded parakeets. They look a little bit like miniature monk parakeets, pretty small parakeet. And then we reach the valley bottom. This is a very important habitat here. You can see we've left the cacti behind, and we've entered this sort of flat area with scattered scrubs. And this is where some of the key endemics are to be found. So we have a chance for the Steinbach's canastero, very localized species, very little known, and it doesn't seem to be abundant in any areas. But looking in the right habitat, one can usually find one or a pair. And then we'll also look in the taller shrubs for this type of structure. This is a large stick nest. It's quite impressive. This one is about, let's say, a meter by half a meter. And if you look really carefully to the left, you might actually see the occupant right there. That's also an endemic species to Argentina. And that's the white-throated cachalot. And we are still in the ovenbirds here. That's another Furnariid. And quite interesting, moves around in pairs, builds these oversized stick nests, and seems to do most of its feeding on the ground. And then we'll keep our ears open for the call of the sandy gallito. So that's another species that's endemic to the Monte Desert and parts of the Patagonian steppe further south. And it's a tapaculo. It's a really unique tapaculo, quite oversized. Runs among the bushes at high speed, usually with the tail raised. And fortunately, it's quite vocal. They seem to have pretty large territories from what I've seen. But since they're vocal, one can usually track one down. And when they're calling, they will oftentimes clamber up into a shrub and sit out in the open like this one did. So 3 endemics here in a very small area. And if we're really lucky, we may come across another endemic that's found mostly in south central Argentina during the breeding season, the cinnamon warbling finch. So this species will actually vacate the northern part of its range during the austral spring and summer. But with some luck, there may still be some individuals around. It does seem to be a little bit nomadic, so it's a bit of an unpredictable species. But it's a wonderful endemic, the cinnamon warbling finch. And some of the tinamous that I promised that are actually visible on this route, one of them is the elegant crested tinamou. So this is near endemic to Argentina. It's found in a very small area in Chile, but it's essentially best seen in Argentina. It's quite numerous and widespread further south in central and southern Argentina. Here in the north, we're right at the northern edge of its distribution. But going out early in the morning into some of these desert flats near Cafayate, one usually stands a chance to see a couple. It's a not particularly shy or secretive for tapaculo. Of course, they will run off at fast speeds if they're disturbed. So like I said, we spent some time in Cafayate. This is one of the wine growing regions of Argentina. Of course, Argentinian wines are quite famous around the world, so there'll be plenty of opportunities to try some local wines alongside some of the delicious meals that you'll have in the country. From here, we actually head in a northeasterly direction. We'll be crossing the Andes again, following the Quebrada de las Conchas. It's a wonderful area landscape-wise. You can see these dramatic sandstone formations, really reminiscent of, let's say, sandstone country in Utah, for example. And there are many stops along this travel day here to take in the landscape. There's the amphitheater rock formations, differently named rock formations, but it's just a dramatic landscape. Lots of photo opportunities. Here you can see this is the actual Quebrada with the river running through. The road is visible to the left, and it's just a wonderful drive through this landscape. There are not that many birds along that route. It's a relatively dry area, but it's burrowing parakeets are abundant here, and they will actually nest in these sandstone cliffs in colonies. They build pretty intricate burrow systems that zigzag into the rocks. It's literally forming a labyrinth pretty high off the ground, and then they'll move around in small flocks during the day to feed. It's quite a large parakeet, size of a macaw, and quite noisy. And this part of Argentina is a wonderful place to get close-up views of it. So to put you back on the map here, so this large area right in the top here of the image, that is Salta. So we'll head to south of Salta, and then we'll head back up into the Andes towards Parque Nacional Los Carridones, the Cactus National Park. That will get us into a really beautiful area of the Andes, the Cuesta del Obispo, or Bishop's Crest. And you can see right here, we're smack in the Puna grasslands. This little dirt road right down here leads to the Valle Encantado, or the Enchanted Valley, which has wonderful rock formations. But it's really wild up here. Just a few farms and ranches further down, no towns or villages, no disturbance. One can pretty much stop anywhere and see an abundance of birds. Here's another image showing the valley and the road winding its way up towards the Bishop's Crest, which is about 11,000 feet, so relatively high in the Andes here. And anywhere in these side valleys and even these slopes will be full of bird life. And from this viewpoint is a great place to watch for Andean condors coming up mid-morning. Andean condors still do very well in Argentina, still a common sight to see. Some of the specialties we seek are the near-endemic rufous-bellied mountain tanager. It seems to be relatively uncommon, never in big numbers, but if we're lucky, 1 or 2 pairs might show along the route here. This is now classified in its monotypic genus, the pseudosaltator. And another tapaculo. So this looks similar to white-browed tapaculo, but this is a near endemic. This is the Zimmer's tapaculo, also occurs in Bolivia. And the two actually don't overlap. So white-browed tapaculo is found just to the south of here, and then in this region you find Zimmer's tapaculo. Looks similar, but vocally very distinctive. And like I said before, some of these high country tapaculos are relatively easy to see and will come out right into the open like this one did on this mossy patch. More ovenbirds, more fernereids up here, like the rock earth creeper, lives in boulder fields, and it's only found in Argentina and Bolivia. We'll look for more canasteros, the maquis canastero, which specializes on this scrubby, dense, low scrub in little side valleys or canyons. Maquis refers to a vegetation type mostly found in Mediterranean climates, but basically refers to dense, hip-high shrubs. And that's exactly where this bird occurs. And even by Canastero standards, I would say this one is particularly plain, but like all ovenbirds, vocally quite distinctive. Good place for pipits. There are Hellmeyer's pipits here in the on the more easterly side because it's a little bit more humid and lush grasses. They'll oftentimes do a display flight, and as we actually move further west, the puna gets drier and higher up. We can find puna pipit later on. And another tinamou up here, the Enchanted Valley, Valle Encantado, is a great place to see ornate tinamou. And they will oftentimes wander out into the open among the grasslands, oftentimes more than one bird, and really nice opportunities to get close studies of tinamous and some photos. Band-tailed sierra finches are numerous up here the higher we go. This one is another now in the tanagers family. And with some really great luck, we may find the boulder finch. This is a really scarce bird. It's found from Peru and Bolivia and Argentina, but it's not really seen regularly anywhere. It's a really neat looking finch. The photo doesn't quite do it justice, but it has this oversized bill. Oftentimes holds its body up like the bill is weighing it down. It's got these fine white speckles underneath the eye. And it's really seems to key on a very specific microhabitat. As the name suggests, there have to be some boulders around and a certain type of vegetation. And oftentimes there has to be some sort of water or it has to be a humid site. And in Argentina, Northwest Argentina, most of the places where it occurs are a long ways away from the road. They're near some remote lagoons or up some remote high mountain slopes. So luckily, there are some sites along the road where there's a chance to see the boulder finch. But I would say this is a real world rarity and a great place to see it or have a chance for it. As we go up and over further west, we get into some drier puna, really starting to look like the proper altiplano. And here we can find birds like tawny-throated dotterel. You can see the intense sunlight and heat building here in this photo. There are also least seed snipes around, and the Andean lapwing, golden-spotted ground dove, a good number of species that are more typical of the puna in, let's say, Peru or Bolivia. There are not many mammals along this tour, but we do have a chance to see the rare North Andean huemul, which is the native deer species here. And one mammal we see for sure is a guanaco, which occurs in good numbers here on the Puna grasslands up in the Altiplano. From here, we descend back down the Andes and we head out east into the Chaco. So the Chaco is a distinctive South American habitat, holds lots of bird specialties and endemics. And I just put this map here to show you. We head out to a small community called Chacopozo, really a small town in the middle of the Chaco. And the Chaco is the largest block of tropical dry forest in South America. It's about 250,000 square miles, extends from northern Argentina through Bolivia and Paraguay, a little bit of Brazil. And in terms of size and biodiversity, it's only second to the Amazon, actually. So a very important habitat. And as you can see from this satellite image, unfortunately, it's being destroyed by agriculture. So these fields right here are mostly soybeans. There's, of course, also cattle grazing. So it is an imperiled habitat. And it's important that good big blocks of Chaco habitat are preserved because some species really depend on what's sort of called the deep Chaco forest. Luckily, around Tacopolzo, there are lots of little dirt roads that radiate out from the small town in all directions, and it's still very easy to find lots of Chaco specialties. And the Chaco forest is just kind of like the Yungas this time of year. It's just full of bird song, full of bird activity, and things are relatively easy to see. Crowned slaty flycatcher is one of the most abundant birds, and you may have seen this bird, let's say in the Amazon basin, where it's also quite common. That's its wintering grounds. So it actually moves south to breed here in the Chaco. Swainson's flycatchers are here in good numbers. That is a widespread species in South America. Taxonomically, a little bit confusing. Plain terannulate adds to the flycatcher count. A little bit more uncommon flycatcher, but readily found here. And then a true Chaco specialty is the Cinereus tyrant. Like other members of this genus, it does a wonderful flight display. So that is one of the birds that's restricted to the Chaco ecosystem. Dark-billed cuckoos are particularly common here, another widespread species, but they breed here in good numbers. And back to the fernery, it's back to the ovenbirds with the wonderful lark-like brush runner. So this has really taken the convergent evolution to a maximum right here. Very similar to a lark. It's got this expressive crest, a face pattern even, and they'll move around in small groups on the ground, feeding methodically on the ground, and flush up to these shrubs when they're calling or when they're disturbed. And they probably breed cooperatively, actually. It's a very interesting little ovenbird. And the crested hornero, this is another Chaco specialty, much more range restricted than the rufous hornero. It's got this small crest, but will also build that classic oven-shaped mud nest that gives the family Ferneriidae its name. And the nest has a little bit of a side entrance that curves around into the nest chamber. And a wonderful, wonderful bird. The scimitar-billed woodcreeper, that's a truly impressive species. It's massive. Feeds mostly on the ground. When it hops around and probing with its bill into the grass, it is really reminiscent of a hoopoe, actually, and about the same size. Another massive woodcreeper that can be found here is the great rufous woodcreeper. Pretty well-named bird. It's large and overall rufous, mostly found by its loud call. More skulky ovenbird, and a specialty here is the Chaco earth creeper. So listening out carefully for its call. Sometimes it will sit up. A pretty distinctive earth creeper with this relatively straight bill, bright white throat. And again, it's not all brown and rufous in this area. There's also the wonderful many-colored Chaco finch, another tanager. This one has been observed feeding on tree sap that's left by woodpecker drillings. So that's quite interesting. Wonderful spotback puffbird. Like most puffbirds, it's a sit-and-wait predator. Here it's represented by the Chaco subspecies. There's another subspecies in the Brazilian Caatinga that occurs disjunctly, and occasionally it's been treated as a separate species, Chaco puffbird versus Caatinga puffbird. And the Chaco sparrow. So this resulted from a relatively recent split of the striped-capped sparrow. And you have now the Yungas and the Chaco version. So the Chaco sparrow is endemic to the Chaco bioregion and relatively small and light colored. A real nice skulker here is the olive-crowned crescent chest. This is the southernmost member of the crescent chest family, which is a small bird family endemic to South America, only has 4 species. Somewhat reminiscent in song of a tapaculo, but much more colorful. And the Argentinian Chaco is a great place to see it. Not too many antbirds here. Striped-backed antbird is one. Also a bit skulky. This is the male with the black throat. Beautiful rufous back. And the last tapaculo of the tour. Yes, this is a tapaculo, the crested gallito. Basically, a little rooster runs on the ground very fast with his crest up, tail usually raised. Can be a bit skulky, but occasionally birds will come right up and sit out in the open. And it's not a small bird. It's about the size of a robin, so pretty large tapaculo species, restricted to the Chaco. Some other fun birds include black-capped warbling finch that move in flocks. Black-crested finch, this one is really restricted more to the dry Chaco. So there are 2 types of Chaco, humid and dry. but this one can be found in the drier areas. Wonderful little tanager. Not too many hummingbirds here, but blue-tufted starthroat is possible. Greenback woodpecker, that's a really impressive species, a classic Campophyllus woodpecker. Does this a typical double knock, and not always common, but it can be actually found throughout the route, even in some of the Yungas forest. To get into some true Chaco specialties, so this one is described as a bird of the deep Chaco, black-bodied woodpecker, probably threatened in Argentina. It's always been quite a rare species, but with more disturbance of the Chaco, it's becoming more and more rare. But around Taco Pozo, there's still a possibility to see it. On the left, you have a female, and on the right, you have a male. Wonderful species of impressive woodpecker. Black-legged Seriema. This is the more rare, more difficult to see of the two Seriemas, another family that's endemic to South America. Black-legged lives in dense Chaco, so it doesn't come out into the open as much, seems to be a bit shyer. It's quite vocal, but not always easy to see. Fortunately, this individual was standing out in the open after a heavy downpour, drying its plumage. And spot-winged falconet is another one that's a real Chaco specialty. Again, not very common, but possible around Taco Pozo. They've been observed nesting within the colonies of these large stick nests of monk parakeets, which is quite interesting. There are a couple lowland wetlands in between that really give a boost to the trip list, where we can see white-tufted grebes, widespread species, great grebe, which is indeed the largest member of the grebe family, ring teal, they're black-headed ducks, and more. So these are oftentimes quick, easy stops to really add quite a few birds to the list. Lake duck, and so on. And even masked duck is possible, really widespread species, but not easy to find. I mean, it ranges all the way from Argentina to Texas, or occasionally Texas at least, but it's nowhere common. Limpkins can be found, of course. This is the brown-backed subspecies. And the impressive giant wood rail is possible. So this really adds to the diversity of the trip. Plumbeous rail, one of the southernmost rails in South America. And in between, we can find the great arraya in some of the open habitats. South America's largest bird and another family that's endemic to the continent. From here, we move to the Calilegua National Park, which has some of the finest examples of Yungas forest. It's actually part of the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve for the Yungas forest. You can see all these ridge lines are covered in pristine forest. And it's full of bird life, including the Yungas guan, which was recently split from dusky-legged guan. Tucumán Amazon is another specialty here, specialty of the region. It's threatened by the pet trade and habitat destruction, unfortunately, but still good-sized flocks in the area. Green-cheeked parakeet, a bit of a more widespread parrot, but wonderful to see. And then the giant antshrike. This is one of the species that shares that distribution within the Yungas and the Atlantic forest. And it's the largest ant bird. It's massive, the size of a jay. It's got a wonderful loud song. That's the best way to find it, and can be surprisingly skulking. So this was really a neat individual that showed relatively well. Plush-crested jays add some color and character to the forest. Blue-crowned trogon can be found here. That's the only trogon on this route. So you can see in the Yungas, you definitely get more of a tropical feel in terms of birds you're seeing. And the only antpitta of the route, actually, white-throated antpitta, also found in Bolivia and Peru, but not always easy to see, and it seems to do quite well in Calilegua National Park. Fulvous-headed brushfinch, that's a near-endemic, mostly found in the alder forest. And the white-browed brushfinch. This resulted from a split of the stripe-headed brushfinch, which was split into 8 species. Most of the other species are quite range-restricted. White-browed is a bit more widespread. Lots of the feeding flocks will hold buff-browed foliage gleaners. Add to the diversity. Ochre-cheeked spinetail can be found here. So some of these birds are familiar from other parts of South America. Ochre-faced toady flycatcher, so very striking flycatcher. Not all of them are difficult to identify. And pale-legged warbler can be found at certain elevations here in Calilegua. So really nice diversity, and I would say Calilegua is the most diverse site of the whole trip in terms of species that are possible. And just a little bit at the edge of the park, you can also find moss-backed sparrow at low elevation in some of the thickets. Beautiful member of that genus. This is the best place for hummingbirds. There are no feeder setups, but so we have to find them in the wild. White-bellied hummingbird is common. Slender-tailed woodstar is decidedly uncommon. Probably occurs mostly low elevation. This is a male right here. At this point, it's known to have the smallest egg of any bird on the planet, although it's based on few measurements, and it may be the second smallest bird on the planet, actually. And it has one of the highest hovering wing beats, so lots of superlatives for this species, but it takes some luck finding. It's not a very common bird. More common is the planalto hermit that occurs here, a widespread species. And much less common is the blue-capped puffleg. Really a bit of rarity, restricted to Bolivia and Argentina. Argentina is the best place to see it, most likely, but it's not very common. This is a female here. It doesn't have very puffy legs, but you can see the sort of blue undertail on this bird. Calilegua is also a great place for owls. So during the day, it's possible to see Yungas pygmy owl, which was split from Andean pygmy owl. And like other pygmy owls, it's quite diurnal. And at night, the montane forest screech owl, this is a near endemic, is quite numerous at the right elevation. So that's an important one to see here. This is the southern extent of the black-banded owl, which is possible. And just the owling is not particularly easy here because of the late sunset during austral spring and summer. But staying out long enough gives you a possibility to see some spectacular owls, including the really special buff-fronted owl. This is a very interesting species, really widespread in South America, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Brazil, and of course Argentina here, but nowhere easily found, nowhere common. But it seems to be that Northwest Argentina is a reasonable place to look for it. We finish our time in the Yungas by visiting the Yala Lagoon, or Laguna de las Yala, and we'll look particularly for the red-faced guan here. That's another near endemic. You can see the red orbital skin and kind of big white eyebrow and paler overall that distinguish it from the Yungas guan. This is a threatened species, unfortunately. Dot-fronted woodpecker can be usually found here. That's another near endemic. Found in the Yungas, oftentimes feeds close to the ground. Nice male right here. Spot-breasted thornbird, another near endemic. Also a bit unusual for a thornbird in terms of living in humid habitats. Most thornbirds live in drier areas, and it will also build a big stick nest, which is oftentimes the best clue to finding it. And then the Yungas sparrow. So this is the counterpart of the Chaco sparrow. Doesn't actually really live in the Yungas forest, lives more in the foothills, scrubby, slightly wetter foothills in further west than the Chaco sparrow, but that's possible around the Yala Lagoon. And to finish out a family, the Seriemas, red-legged Seriema, can be found in the foothills here. And again, these are usually more easy to see as they come into open habitats. From here, we move north through the Quebrada de Humahuaca, which lots of wonderful geological features. And we're moving to higher elevation here, really into the true Altiplano and Puna. And this is probably the longest drive along the route heading up to La Quiaca on the border with Bolivia. Along the way, there's lots of Andean wetlands, lagoons, marshes, and small lakes. And these are full of bird species that we haven't seen up to this point. Things like Andean gulls are quite numerous. And then the wonderful giant coot, aptly named coot. It really is large and quite confiding, and they will build these vegetative platforms, nesting platforms. Now, oftentimes you'll see them running around stealing nesting material from each other. Also a great place to see flamingos. So Chilean is the most numerous, but they're usually smaller numbers of Andean flamingos here, right in the middle, the larger image. And then also the small and scarce James's flamingo can be found mixed in, which is the smaller image down on the left, smaller bird with redder legs. So from here, we are basically driving north, and you can see the white line up here. That's the border with Bolivia. We end up at La Quiaca, And from La Quiaca, we actually head in an easterly direction, head on east back up into the Andes to the highest elevation of the tour. We head to the small community of Yavi, which holds a couple specialties, and then head right back up to another pass called Abra del Dizoita. So around Yavi, we can find species like bare-faced ground dove. That's a species, it's more common further north, but just comes across the border into Argentina here. And then the wonderful citron-headed yellowfinch, quite common around the small village. Also, this is about the only place to see it in Argentina. And the wedge-tailed hillstar, really impressive hummingbird. This is a female right here, and also quite an uncommon species that's best seen around Yavi. Of course, it never ends with the fernariids or ovenbirds, also a great place to get better views of creamy-breasted canasteros in the scrubby vegetation here. And then as we move out of the village, you move into the Altiplano, into the high Andes, and scenes like this become quite common. This is the vicuña, the smaller relative of the guanaco. So you see small groups or herds of vicuña. And then heading up to the pass, the landscape becomes real stark and barren. And we're pretty much at the pass just below 15,000 feet. So you can imagine the sun is quite intense and the air is quite thin, but just a wonderful area to go birding in as a chance for gray-breasted seed snipes and other species. Some of the specialties we look for here include the red-beaked sierra finch. Again, just comes over the border here in this part of Argentina. And then the main tour, with great luck, will finish with a highlight with a diadem sandpiper plover. There's one little canyon that just holds the right habitat for this scarce and special shorebird. Not always easy to find, doesn't seem to be numerous in the area, but with great luck, we might find an individual or a pair. So before I finish, so that finishes the main tour. From the Bolivian border, we basically head back south, straight south to Salta, where we conclude. But before I finish, I'd like to just mention really quick that this tour can be taken alongside with an extension that's highly recommended. It's a 5-day extension to Cordoba, which is in central Argentina, and it visits the isolated Sierra del Cordoba, and also visits, so you can see right here, so the main tour occurs up here. You see all these little blue markers, and then right here in the middle, you have the large city of Cordoba. There's the isolated mountain range here. It also visits Mar Chiquita, a small inland sea, and then travels out to these large salt pans called Salinas Grande. So it's a very worthwhile add-on. It will add several endemics to several Argentinian endemics, and it will also add more chances for some of the more difficult Chaco specialties. So definitely worthwhile taking. And Cordoba is easy to get to from Buenos Aires, and then it's easy to connect from Cordoba to Tucumán. So the Sierras del Cordoba, like I mentioned, is an isolated mountain range. It sits well to the east of the main Andes, but still supports this Puna-type high elevation grasslands, which is home to the endemic Cordoba synclodes. It's actually migratory, so during the winter it will actually move to lower elevations north of Cordoba, but during the spring and summer it's quite numerous here. And another ovenbird, this is also endemic to this part of Argentina, the Olroke synclodes, somewhat reminiscent of a white-winged synclodes. The long-tailed meadowlark subspecies here is possibly an endemic species, sometimes referred to as Sierran meadowlark, a bit different looking than the more widespread subspecies. And then from the mountains, we head down to Mar Chiquita, and you can see this is a really, really birdy place. I mean, literally tens of thousands of birds, and one could spend days here working through the birds. In the foreground in this image, there are lots of southern lapwings, red shovelers, cinnamon teal, white-cheeked pintails, gray-hooded and brown-hooded gulls. Flamingos are mostly Chilean flamingos with a few Andean flamingos mixed in. And then in the air, you have mostly actually white-cheeked pintails and cattle egrets. So just packed with birds. And we have can spend a couple hours sorting through all these water birds. But one of the specialties we actually come for here is a small flycatcher called the Denellis doradito, which is a breeding endemic to this part of Argentina and will breed in these reed beds and then migrate north during the austral winter. And Mar Chiquita is also a great place to catch up with South American painted snipe. Can be found in Chile and Argentina and parts of Brazil, but it's never seems to be quite common. And there's a good, reliable spot near Mar Chiquita to see it. And then we'll also move to the Salinas Grande. It's a very unique habitat, these vast salt flats with these salt-tolerant shrubs that are very low, less than knee height. And there's a very unique and special bird that lives here, the Salinas monchita. And it's only found in this very small area of Argentina. And it lives in small groups or even flocks during the winter, just out on these salt plains. It's not migratory and similar to the rusty-backed monchita, but overall plainer and paler. Probably one of the most range-restricted Argentinian endemics. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. There's a lot of birds to go through in a very fast time. Lots of areas to cover. And like I said, Argentina is a large country with lots of areas, other areas to visit too. And we do offer tours pretty much to the rest of the country. But it will probably take multiple visits to do the country justice. There are the famous Ibarra marshes, the Valdez Peninsula, the Patagonian steppes, and we do have tours to all those destinations if you're interested in those. But I appreciate your time. Thank you for listening. And yeah, it'd be great to get some questions, some comments, and thank you again.
Oh, fantastic, Stefan. Wow, that was incredible. As you say, it's a real melting pot, like a mixing point. There's some familiar species from further north in South America, and then all these specials, and just an amalgamation of habitats. It's a really fantastic part of the world. Yeah, we're getting so many nice comments coming through here as well. Folks just thanking you for your time and putting together such a wonderful presentation. So yeah, massive thanks, Stefan. And yeah, there are quite a few questions that have come through, so we'll start right
Great.
now. So I guess first up over here, folks were just wondering about the overall altitude. Obviously, you're getting up and down quite a bit. So just wanting to know essentially how long are we staying at the different altitude levels during the trip, and kind of what's the band, I guess, that we get into as far as altitude goes. And do we ever get high enough to be concerned about altitude sickness?
So yeah, that's a really good point, and I didn't quite get to address each location with altitude because we do go up and down, but that's a good point. So I would say the way the tour route works, it works quite well because it does start off at some altitude, but then progressively it goes higher and higher and higher, and the highest altitude is actually reached at the very, very end of the tour, almost literally the last day. So it gives everybody an opportunity to acclimatize. But Tucumán, the Chaco, for example, that's all relatively low. That's actually below 1,000 feet. But from Tucumán, we head to Tafi del Valle. That's at about 6,600 feet. So that's where we'll spend some nights. And then we'll go birding at Infernillo, which that reaches about 10,000 feet. And that's basically a day outing to go birding there, or driving over, traveling to Cafayate. Cafayate will be again at about 6,000 feet. And then we'll head back to the Salta area, which will be relatively low. Cuesta del Obispo is at about 11,000 feet. And then we head out to the Chaco, which is low, and Calilegua, it's mid-elevation. But then up to La Quiaca, that's where we really get into the Altiplano. And where I've seen the most difficulties is really going to Lizoita Pass, or Abra del Lizoita, because that's just below 15,000 feet. So that's, that's very noticeable. And there you take all the precaution with hydration and moving slowly and so on. So the tour does not stay constantly at high altitude. It does vary quite a bit because we're essentially sort of going up into the Andes 4 times and going back down. and most of the sleeping arrangements are at reasonable elevation, except at the end at La Quiaca near the border with Bolivia. I mean, it's relatively high, but we're never sleeping, let's say, above 10,000 or 8,000 feet. Well, we're birding those sites, and like you saw, the roads are really quiet. Lots of habitats along the roads, so that it's
Mm.
easy to bird right from the road. There are not many difficult walks or hikes required at all on this tour. Um, Occasionally walk a little bit away from the road to look for some specialties. But I hope that clarifies it a little bit.
Excellent. I think that's some great detail. Thanks, Stefan. That's fantastic. So Eric was just wondering, are efforts being made to preserve the Chaco forest at all? I mean, are any of these big chunks of Chaco like in national parks, or is it all just kind of open to being
Yes,
farmed?
yes. Fortunately, yes. There is it's called the Chaco National Park, and I think there's also one. If I'm hoping I'm remembering this correctly, like, but the Impenetrable National Park, and they're big chunks of essentially inaccessible Chaco. And the reason nobody goes birding at the Chaco National Park is because it actually is really inaccessible. I mean, there are no roads, no easy trails. There's almost no practical way to go birding there. And then in other countries, Paraguay and Bolivia still have vast areas of relatively wild Chaco. But in Argentina, they definitely need to start doing something to preserve some of those areas. They're basically, as far as I understand, there was a bit of a switch in agricultural technology, which now allows for growing soybeans on these, what are not the richest soils apparently. But so soybean production has really increased, and that's eating away at the Chaco there in Argentina.
Mhm.
But so currently, I'm not aware of anything. There are some near Cordoba, for example. There is a large private reserve that they where they set aside for ecotourism and protecting the Chaco. So there are things done to some degree locally. But overall, the habitat is still doing well because it's so vast and there's still wild areas left. It's just the more accessible parts are becoming, more impacted by either cutting some of the larger trees or having cattle grazing on them. But even around Tacopozo, I mean, even when you bird the areas that are used for cattle grazing, there's still Cabracho, crested tinamous, all the species are still there, luckily, because the area is so big.
Okay, very good. Then Peter was just wondering what English language field guide do you recommend to the area?
Oh yeah, I usually put that in. There's a
Yeah.
can't think of the top of my head, but there's a new one right now. It just came out. Um, I think it's by Princeton, but it's 'cause for a long time Argentina did not have a good one. But now there's if you just look up Argentinian, I think it's got I have it on a bookshelf somewhere, but I think it's got a Strange Tale Tyrant on the front.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's quickly have a look and see who the author is. That's absolutely the one.
Yeah, it's the
Um,
definite work.
Excellent. Well, yeah, we'll quickly get back to the field guide one. I can have a look at it when we go through the next question. So, folks are also commenting so many stunning photos, just an incredible abundance of great images, and they're sort of guessing that photography is pretty good on this trip. Would that be a correct assumption?
Yes. So quite a few of the habitats, the Andean areas and the Chaco in particular, quite open habitats. During that time of year, birds are really in their full breeding activity, and there's still really, a high density of birds, which is so you can see many of these species multiple times, and they're quite approachable. And yeah, photography is really a lot of fun in that part of the world. And you can see almost any species is photographable, as you could see. Given that these photos there are a conglomeration of 4 or 5 years, in total. So definitely didn't take all these photos on one trip, but no, photography is fantastic there of birds and landscape and so on.
Yes. Yeah, the open country certainly helps as well. It's
Hmm.
fantastic. But yeah, they are mouth watering. Sure, so many amazing birds, so many amazing photos. Karen's just wondering here. She says, "Is Northwest Argentina the best for number of species in Argentina as far as our tours go?"
That's a really good question, and I was actually thinking about that earlier. I would say uh, yes, probably. Argentina does have a slice of the Atlantic rainforest. So, for example, around world famous Iguazu National Park, it does have a very famous wetland, the Ibarra marshes, which are somewhat reminiscent of the Pantanal, minus some of the large mammals, but it's a really good place for seed eaters and so on. So I would say the northeast of the country can definitely compete in terms of overall species number and probably has
Yeah,
more, just because the Atlantic, you're actually accessing not necessarily lowland rainforest, but you're accessing rainforest and wetlands in that region.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I actually just went in now and quickly pulled up our trip list document from all of our trips over the years, and yeah, you're spot on. I see our Northeast tours, we typically get around 325 in like 11 days. So it's there and thereabouts, kind of very
No,
similar
equal,
to
equal,
Northwest.
and yeah, I mean, you in
Yeah,
Northwest you can get 340 if you're getting lucky if you're pushing it.
yeah,
Not that they should compete, but
yeah.
the difference is Northwest Argentina offers more endemics. Um, in terms of that, definitely holds more Argentinian endemics. And that's because the Atlantic rainforest stretches into Paraguay and Brazil, so not too many endemics. But like I'm trying to mention earlier, it's both places are absolutely worthwhile visiting. Can't go wrong. Ideally, you go to both.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Exactly.
Hmm.
Just do both. We'll get to a few more of these questions now, but I did want to read through a few of the comments that I'm just seeing coming through, Stefan, as well. Folks are saying, very well done, lots of species. Constant returning to the maps was greatly appreciated. So thanks so much for that. And I guess notes for future webinars as well. Cindy was just saying, thanks, Stefan. Enjoyed reliving the trip from January 2023 with you,
Well, thank you, Cindy.
which wonderful. Luke's just saying one of the best birding Zoom meetings ever. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Thank
Um,
you very much.
and folks saying excellent job as usual, informative, entertaining, and very professional. Thanks. So yeah, wonderful job, Stefan. And thank you all for your comments as well. Really appreciate it.
Yes, no, I really
Um,
appreciate it.
so just something about seasonality here. Karen's also just asking, what's the best season for this tour? I mean, is it very time specific or, is there a bit of a wider time frame that can be considered?
So definitely the austral spring and summer. Couple of the species that I showed won't be there in the winter, and they are replaced by some other species during the winter. But overall activity, song activity will be lower. So anywhere from October into January, that would be an ideal time. Uh, Keeping in mind that in January, when you're more into summer, it gets hotter. So, but I've been there, October, November, December, January, actually all those 4 months, and it's been good every time. That's probably the biggest change is that particularly in the Chaco, later in the what's this austral summer there, it just gets hotter quicker in the day. But the Chaco in general it's a hot place. It's a hot habitat. Um, you can run into some rains, which is not always a bad thing because it will keep bird activity up. But yeah, that's basically it. October to January would be the best.
Excellent. Thanks for that. And some folks just asking, are we considering an extension to include the Iberra wetlands?
I believe we have a tour to the Iberra wetlands. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not um, that really in terms of practicality that it's like we have it offered on the website. It needs to be a separate tour because Ibarra is a great place. I've been there several times. Really, really unique birding there. The strange tailed tyrant alone is worth it, and then just full of different species of seed eaters and other wildlife. And but it's a long ways away from Northwest Argentina. It's placed much more in Northeast Argentina, so it's much more combines with Iguazu. It's
Yeah.
essentially it's about 5 hours north of Buenos Aires if you drive it. So, but yes, we definitely have a tour there and very worthwhile going.
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, if you want to, yeah, get to Iberra, just look at our northeast Argentina trip. It's a massive part of that itinerary, and as Stephan's saying, a very worthwhile place to go as well. So Jeff's just wondering here, giant hummingbird. He's heard talk of the splitting it into two species. You got any thoughts on that?
Yes, there's a I guess a quite a genetic difference between the migratory subspecies of giant hummingbird and the resident. And I actually preparing for this, I looked into it and it hasn't really been listed clearly. So
Hmm.
there's possibly a split coming up in the future, and this one would fall. I think it's a north-south split essentially. So this one would obviously fall into the southern population, but there wasn't anything really clearly written yet on those two subspecies. But it is something that's possibly coming down the line, and that's for several of these species, especially some of the widespread Furnariids, some of these tit spine tails and canasteros. There are, possible splits coming in the future.
Brilliant. Just a little bit about practical stuff here about diet and transport now. Catherine's just wondering, um, she's 100% vegan. Is it easily catered for? Or is it quite complicated?
So I didn't mention the food so much, so it's a good question that comes up. As you know, Argentina is famously beef country, famous for its steak and so on. Um, and that's really one of the staples, or milanesa, which is kind of almost like a chicken fried steak, but with chicken. Um, but that being said, it is changing. In the country does seem it's changing, so the attitudes are changing, and there's a much more variety of food available. That I found that especially during my last visit. So it's meat dishes are really the norm, but it is possible to cater to somebody who doesn't want to eat meat, or it's a little bit more tricky than in other countries, but it is doable. Um, and Argentina is also quite famous for having very late dinners. So the food culture is different there. Late breakfast, late dinners. So one needs to adapt while traveling here. But there definitely, all I can say is there are definitely more choices available now than there used to be a couple of years ago. It is changing.
Hmm. Yep, yep. Places are constantly changing. It seems to be it's the only constant. Um, Ground transportation. What vehicles are we using on the tours out there, Stefan?
It's like best way. It's like a mini bus or very large van. It's sort of one of those vehicles in between, very roomy, spacious, and that's basically what's used for the entire tour. There aren't any areas where you need to switch into four-wheel drives or anything like that. The majority of the roads are in very good shape, even into some of these remote Andean sites. They either, narrow paved roads, or if they're dirt roads, they tend to be in good shape. Um, the only place around Taco Pozo out in the Chaco, if it rains, then no vehicle will go anywhere. So that's even with a four-wheel drive, you can't drive on those. It's a very distinctive soil that won't let any vehicle through. But usually it's dry anyway. Yeah, I can't. The if we visit a remote lagoon site uh, in the north that lies a little bit further west, there may be a switch to four-wheel drive vehicles or jeeps for that section. But in general, it's all done by a minibus.
Excellent. Great. So just coming back to the author of the book, thanks for the reminder that's just come through in the
Yes.
chat. So it's The Birds of Argentina and the Southwest Atlantic, and the primary author is Mark Perman.
Hmm. Exactly. I should have remembered that off the top of my head right now. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and as you said, it's the one with the beautiful strange-tailed tyrant on the front cover. So that would be the field guide that we would certainly recommend for Argentina, and as I said, cover the Southwest Atlantic as well. So yeah, great field guide for the area. We've sort of discuss some of the expected weather and what have you. Difficulty of the tour. I mean, you have touched on that already to some degree, Stefan. I've been mentioning it's not overly difficult
No,
tour
I mean,
walking wise.
I would say moderate. I mean, there might be one sort of optional longer walk to, let's say, to see, let's Scribble-tailed Canastero or something. But overall, it's the birding is right along the road, and it's easy to move up and down with the vehicle to different elevations. And yeah, one doesn't really need to hike anywhere. I mean, Calilegua National Park is pristine Yungas forest, for miles and miles driving up that road. So no, it's relatively easy. Bird activity is throughout the day, not super early starts. The If anybody wants to do owling, one would have to stay out pretty late. That'd probably be the toughest because sunset is pretty late that time of year.
Yeah, long days. All right, excellent. So, someone else is also just asking here about what's the overall average comfort level of the accommodations and hotels on the tour?
Yeah, I would say very good. They're all well established, comfortable hotels. The simplest one would be up at La Quiaca, right on the border with Bolivia. It's a regular hotel in town. Um, Nothing fancy. It's all en-suite bathrooms and so on. I mean, no shared bathroom or anything. Um, but overall, I would say good to very good. In Cafayate, we actually stay at a winery. It's a really beautiful spot. It's wonderful rooms, wonderful property. So definitely, I mean, Argentina is a very developed country. I mean, given for all their economic and issues they can have sometimes, it actually is really well developed in terms of the road system, accommodation, and food.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a quick question from Paul, wondering about horned grebe in the area. Just a vagrant, or or possible?
Hooded grebe, I guess.
Sorry, hooded. Yeah, sorry, hooded
Okay.
grebe.
Yeah, no,
Yes,
I knew that's what you meant.
yes,
No, it's never been seen in that part of Argentina. So
yeah,
that goes back to the size of the country. We are probably 2,000 miles out of its range where we are. It's the hooded grebe is really restricted to the very southern part of Patagonia, to the Strobel Plateau there. And I do believe we offer a tour to that part too, to see the hooded grebe. But the hooded grebe requires a bit of an expedition nowadays. It's a fastly declining species, and the area where they nest with some regularity, um, it's a long ways from anywhere. I
yeah.
mean, we're talking a 10, 12-hour drive. Fortunately, many years ago, I got to see them in one of the slightly easier locations, a little bit of a staging area before they move up into the Strobel Plateau, where they nest on these crater-like lakes. Um, but even that was, a 10, 12-hour round trip drive. But a very worthwhile bird seeing, gets you to a beautiful area of the country too. Gives you a chance for Patagonian tinamou and so on, but not on this particular tour.
Absolutely. And then entry requirements for Argentina.
It's gotten a
Any
lot
difficulties
easier, at
getting
least.
in?
Yeah, sorry. From which perspective, Keith? From
From American.
okay, yeah, it's gotten a lot easier. Basically, just no visa required. You just get a entry on arrival as a tourist. There used to
Yeah,
be reciprocal fee many years ago, but it's been done away with. So it's really easy to enter.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, very wonderful country to go and explore. Okay, last question over here. Uh, Alex is asking about how many endemics does Argentina have, and can you see most on this Northwest trip if you combine it with Cordoba?
Yes, you can see the majority if you combine it with Cordoba because that will give you a chance of counting correctly here about 12. And the number of
Okay.
endemics, it's about 18 currently that are recognized. It depends a little bit on
Yeah,
taxonomy and it depends a little bit on if certain islands are included in the country or not. But that's a sticky issue we don't need to get into.
absolutely.
So it's about eight. I would
Absolutely.
say about 18, and yes, you can see the majority of them on that tour. The others are quite scattered. Um, it can take a little bit of traveling to see all the Argentinian endemics.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And as you said at first as well, so many near endemics as well.
Yes.
It's just an extraordinary number. So a lot of localized, very restricted birds to the region, I guess. All right, excellent. Yeah, I think that's it. We're all good on the questions. Thanks so much, folks. All the questions that came through. Thank you, Stefan, for all your patience and yeah, talking us through all those questions and providing such insightful answers. Really appreciate it. And once again, thank you so much for your time and such a wonderful presentation. And to all of you folks out there, yeah, thank you very much for joining us today. Yeah, happy birding to you all, and we'll see you at the next webinar. It's going to be on the 26th of February. And Rob Williams is going to be speaking, and he's going to be taking us on a virtual journey through central Peru. So, an exciting part of the world, and one that's not as frequently explored as the areas to the north or the south of Peru, which Rob has actually already done presentations on. So this will sort of complete Peru to some degree when he focuses in on central Peru. So yeah, do join us for that one, 26th of February. We'll be sending out the usual email notifications and you can sign up. And yeah, look forward to it. And we'll see you there. And bye for now.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Keith. Take care.